So you've probably clicked on this video to learn about Abound and wondering what happens if you don't pay those club dues and ultimately opt out. Well, we're going to talk about what happens when you do that, or actually don't do that, right after this. Hello and welcome to Destination Timeshare. I'm Jeremy. Today we're going to talk about what happens when you don't pay your Abound club dues and ultimately opt out of Abound by Marriott Vacations. So we actually have an FAQ here. This FAQ is actually available on the Vistana.com website in the view statements and make payments section. So you can actually go over there, check that out. But I'm going to talk about just a couple of points on here of what happens when you don't pay your club dues bill that's actually due coming up towards the end of the month. Maybe you've paid it already, or maybe it was actually attached and included with your maintenance fee bill. But I know quite a few people who are actually billed this club dues separately by Marriott Vacation Club. So we're going to go over what happens when you don't pay it. There's actually two scenarios here at play, and it all depends on what type of ownership you have and where you own and what you own. So the first one we're going to talk about here is mandatory ownership or mandatory membership in VSN. And this applies to the resorts of Sheraton Vistana Villages, Bella and Key West phases only, the Westin St. John, the Virgin Grand section, the Westin Ka'anapali Ocean Resort Villas North and South. You also have the Westin Kierland Villas and Harborside Resort at Atlantis. Now, Harborside Resort at Atlantis actually currently isn't even in Abound. They are saying sometime later in 2023 that they hope to be able to actually include that. So we're not really talking about those owners at the moment. But essentially, if you own at one of those resorts, your membership in the Vistana Signature Network or VSN is considered mandatory. I did do another video explaining a little bit more about what mandatory ownership really is. Talks about that. I will put a link to it right up here, so check that out. But if you own one of those resorts, those club dues that are anywhere from $230 up to $295 were actually billed with your maintenance fee bill. So if you've paid your maintenance fees in full, well, this video really doesn't probably apply to you because you've already paid your club dues. Now, if you decide you don't want to pay those higher club dues, what you actually have to do is call Vistana and say you want to opt out of Abound by Marriott Vacations. And then when you do that, what exactly happens? Well, essentially, your ownership, your usage, what you can use your ownership for kind of reverts back to prior to the Abound days. You have access to the Vistana Signature Network, star options. You can book your home resort, and you can also exchange through Interval International. Now, the fee actually does go down, so you won't be paying that club dues fee. You're going to be paying what they call the old VSN fee, which would range anywhere from $170 to $235. So really not a whole lot lower than the club dues fee, but you would be saving some money there on those VSN fees essentially. But keep in mind here, all of those individual transaction fees that might have applied in the past, like banking, canceling a star option reservation within 60 days of travel, guest certificate fees, housekeeping fees, converting to Marriott Bonvoy points, those fees would now all apply because those are actually included in the consolidated fee structure of Abound with that higher club fee. Whereas if you opt out and you don't pay that higher club fee, well, everything kind of reverts, like I said, to before, and those individual transaction fees or a la carte fees would now apply going forward as well. So that's kind of it for a mandatory owner. And the reason essentially why you end up having to pay that lower fee is because your membership in VSN is mandatory. They can't take that away from you. It's part of your, essentially your deeded ownership rights. So what they're allowing you to do is opt out, go back to that old VSN structure and use it essentially as you always have, and you just lose those additional Abound benefits. Okay, now the second scenario here, this applies to everybody else who's not one of those resort owners. So if you also own Sheraton Flex, Westin Aventuras, or even the Westin St. John, Coral Vista, and Sunset Bay, or Westin Nanea, well, you're essentially considered a voluntary VSN member. Your membership in VSN is voluntary. It's not part of your deeded rights. You don't necessarily have to be a VSN member. So with voluntary VSN membership, those Abound club dues, that club dues bill you're seeing was probably actually billed separately by Marriott Vacation Club, and they're wanting you to go over and pay that on the Marriott Vacation Club website. So what happens if you don't pay those club dues? Well, that's where we're going to talk about a specific section here in the FAQ and what it says. VSN members that have voluntary enrollment associated with their VOIs who do not pay annual club dues will be considered delinquent and will be unenrolled in VSN and unaffiliated with Abound by Marriott Vacations. Very important thing for me to stress here, will be considered delinquent and will be unenrolled from VSN. Not only when you don't pay those club dues are you giving up Abound by Marriott Vacations, you're giving up everything as well that the Vistana Signature Network, VSN, offered you. So the ability to reserve at any of the 20 plus Vistana resorts, well, guess what? That is wiped out as well. Goes on here to say, use rights will be limited to home resort usage or the ability to exchange through an affiliated exchange provider using an individual exchange provider account subject to payment of a membership fee. So essentially what they're saying here is you can reserve your home resort week if you own a week. As a week's owner, you also won't be able to check in any day of the week. You'll have to essentially book Friday, Saturday, or Sunday check-in for a 7-night stay. Essentially have to use your entire ownership all at one time, making that home resort reservation. If you own home options, well, then you can reserve using those home options in the home option collection. So Sheraton Flex, I believe you have 9 resorts you can pick from. Starting at the 12-month mark, you can make a reservation using those home options at any of the resorts in the collection. Same is true with Westin Flex, except I believe there's 8 resorts. Westin Aventuras has just 3. And when they talk about an external exchange provider here, they're pretty much talking mainly about Interval International, but they could also be referring to RCI because some of the Vistana resorts are actually dual affiliated with Interval International and RCI. So if you want to exchange into a Vistana resort essentially in the future and you've not paid that club fee and you've been unenrolled from VSN and unaffiliated with Abound by Marriott Vacations, well, you essentially have to go through one of those exchange providers to exchange into other Vistana resorts. Does seem a little bit drastic here, but essentially the way it looks they've done this is between the VSN and Abound, they've created a master affiliation agreement. Essentially affiliates VSN with Abound. And in order to opt out of Abound for a VSN voluntary member, essentially they also have to take you out of the VSN program. So it does look like a pretty significant downgrade here for voluntary owners if you do not pay the club dues. This information here was gleaned from information that we have to date from Vistana, looking at their documentation, looking at the FAQs, looking at the Abound exchange procedures, and also just reports of what people have been saying when they've called Vistana to try and opt out as a voluntary owner. I'm actually kind of curious, have you tried opting out or have you opted out? Especially if you're a voluntary owner, I'd really like to try and get some more information about voluntary owners opting out of Abound and finding out if they can actually still stay in VSN by paying those VSN fees instead, that lower VSN fee. Kind of curious. Let me know what you found out in the comments down below, and especially if you've opted out, I'd like to hear that as well. But if you haven't opted out and you're still not too sure, well, I actually did do another video about if you should opt out of Abound. I'll actually put a link to it right up here, so check that out coming up next. I'd like to thank you for watching, and if you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. It really does help out. And remember, until next time, the best destination is always a timeshare.